And we should be live. One of these
That's
days,
what
I'll
the little
remember.
message on the screen said.
Exactly. One of these days, I'll remember to write pre-roll or like, yeah, like an opening and a closing.
Oh,
Maybe
wait.
for that.
Before we start, let's decide what we're going to say at the beginning.
Yeah, let's do it live on stream, you know? Yeah, we'll wing it. How are you, Howard? How's life?
I'm doing well. Right now I have learned how to play Pokemon Go without actually walking.
What does that look like? Are you driving around?
It looks a lot like telling Google Fit that I'm on a treadmill. And then I just push play. And then I just sort of shake my phone while I watch TV or whatever. And
you need one of those devices that people now use to work from home and convince their bosses that they're not away from Slack or whatever it is. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're just like
I've thought about building some sort of a little electric motor thing that just swings the phone back and forth.
But,
yeah. But then my phone wouldn't be in my hand. So, and this is fine. It gives me something to do absent-mindedly. It's like a fidget spinner, only I get game coins for it.
Exactly. Until you get tennis elbow from shaking your phone back and forth.
Oh, I don't have to move the phone very much. I have figured out what the minimum movement is.
Okay.
This is
okay.
That's a large part of the strategy of me now being a long COVID disabled guy, is figuring out what is the absolute minimum movement required in order to accomplish a task. I am all over that.
Yes. Dr. Word Person, thank you. This sweater is incredibly comfy and cozy. There was like an article on Atlantic this last week that was about why sweaters are bad now. And the answer was primarily that they're full of non-natural fibers, right? So it's very hard to get an all wool sweater anymore. Thankfully, they ended the article with a recommendation for a US made, handmade all wool sweater. The company's called O'Connell's. They're out of Buffalo, New York. I was like, there's going to be a run on these. So I immediately jumped on it. I've always wanted one of these and I'm planning on wearing it pretty much all winter long. I think I'm just going to be in this until the sun comes back in 1,000 months.
It looks very comfy.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm very, very fond of it already. I've had it for like 3 days. So I appreciate the compliment and the observations. Okay, so it looks like people are rolling in. I guess we will officially start this with the opening script that I have not written. So I'm still making up off the top of my head. But this is the Writing Excuses Patreon Q&A. We do these monthly on the third Tuesday of every month now. If you would like to submit a question for the Q&A, you can do that through our Patreon. That's patreon.com/writingexcuses. And then we will try and answer it on stream. The streams are free for everybody, but to submit a question, you have to go through the Patreon portal, or I guess submit it that way. Anyways, so once again, this month you have me and Howard here to answer your questions. Shall we dive in, Howard?
Sure.
Excellent. Do you want to read the first question?
I will. Are we starting with the 10/2/2023?
Dealer choice.
Okay. How do you write the other when you are the other and you're trying to figure out how so-called normal people experience the world? I'm bi, and straight people seem to have a much different experience in that there's a much narrower range of people they're potentially attracted to, and also no one is wondering whether you want to be the object of your affection or just date them. I'm also gender fluid / agender, and I lack the experience of really knowing what gender I am within certain parameters, or even caring very much. Gay friends and trans friends are more than happy to explain their differences to me, or their experiences to me. And there's also plenty of helpful reading material out there. But while my straight friends and cis friends are happy to talk, those same sorts of questions come across like long string of question marks to them, like they don't even know how to conceptualize giving an answer. Help.
I was on the other spreadsheet. Apparently, we have two spreadsheets, and one of them is very outdated. And so, if you can begin to answer this question while I read it, because I spent the entire time looking for it.
I'm gonna start by saying I feel like I need a clarification right at the top. I'm not sure if you're talking about writing someone outside of your demographic or writing within your demographic so that someone outside of your demographic can understand it. That's, I mean, the question is, or the question, the dilemma is very well described, but I'm not sure what exactly you're trying to write. You know, are you trying to write the bi experience in a way that a broader audience than just you will get it? Or are you trying to write cis, hetero, gay, binary, I'm not sure what the terminology is for that, characters in a way that is believable?
Yeah, so reading the question, now that I have the right spreadsheet open, my read of it is that the question asker is asking how to write sort of like a non-marginalized identity when they're not of it, right? So because it is true, like, you know, if you are bi and agender, you don't have the lived experience of being a heterosexual cisgender person, right? And so you are somewhat projecting yourself into another person's experience. And so I think fundamentally the advice is still the same for writing someone who is a different identity from you, which is something that you will naturally have to do over and over again as a writer, right? There's no, hopefully you are not writing only people who are exactly like you, right? And so to that end, what I recommend, as I recommend for, you know, a white person trying to write a POC, or, you know, a queer person, or like a straight person trying to write a queer character, whatever it is, right? That you lean into specificity, right? So think about what the lived experience of that person is, and don't try to speak for them in terms of necessarily what are the things that motivate them, where they come from, and all that, but focus more on experience and focus on how they are moving through the world and interacting with the plot. If they are not your main character, they're a side character, that's easier. If they are the main character, then think about what experiences form them, right? You know, look at all of the stories that are written from, you know, a heterosexual cis position and use that as a template to work off of or to inform your reading. Now, usually we talk about writing the other, meaning like trying to write a marginalized character, because there's so much less data and stories available for that. Most of it goes the other direction, right? So you are in luck that if you want to write about heterosexuals in a romance, you have reams and reams and reams of information to pull from.
You have a billion pages of boilerplate.
Exactly. There's an entire channel called Hallmark that's got you covered, you know? So, you know, but the basic process is the same. Do your homework, do your research, try and talk to some folks if you can. The idea of getting a sensitivity reader for cis and straight is very funny, but it may be useful in this case, right? Just stuff to think about in that case. Fundamentally, not that different. It is hard to write things that you haven't experienced, but that is kind of the job of the author. That's kind of what fiction is projecting yourself into someone else's experience and trying to put that on the page in a way that is relatable to everybody. It doesn't speak for people from that, you know, identity group. Although I don't know how many people can get really mad if you, like, you know, spoke for the cis experience in some way.
Yeah, I come back to it anytime I think about writing the other, and especially think about you know, specific writing experiential things. You know, how do two people's experiences of the same event or the same circumstance, how do they differ? I always come back to the sadly way too true aphorism. Men are afraid that women are going to laugh at them. Women are afraid that men are going to kill them. You know, and that writing as a man and not understanding that difference will fail to inform your fiction. Finding things like that, where the lived experience of two groups, the marginalized group and the dominant demographic, are really different, can help you to inform your fiction. And finding a sensitivity reader, a subject matter expert to pick those out for you is going to be invaluable.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. So this is a follow-up from a question from last month about writing a space that feels big and well-defined, right? So that question was like, how do you write like a large concert hall or an open field or the steps or something like that? So how do you train your imagination to nail the exact most relevant piece of sensory detail? I like to think of it in terms of visual art, like the Impressionists or the Hudson River School or Joseph Mallard William. Wow, he had so many more names than I realized. Joseph Turner, where a large portion of the picture can be quite hazy, but one certain part has sharp detail and your mind fills in the rest. But I have a very hard time thinking through what that exact piece of detail is. And I have a much harder time imagining, such as sound, touch, or smell. As the visual artist here, Howard, do you have thoughts on this one?
I'm going to lead with the bad news. The question included the word train. How do you train your imagination? How do you train your writing chops? And the bad news is that training implies practice, and practice implies rote, non-remunerated activities. Sit down in the park, in a large park, and experience it, and then try to write about the experience using all your senses that evokes for you the openness of the area. And then do it in a small space and a small outdoor space, like an itty bitty courtyard. Write the two and then read them and see if they sound different to you, see if they feel different. Practice is one of the most difficult. I'm looking for a word besides practices, because circular. Practice is one of the most difficult practices to learn how to practice effectively, because you have to find the things that you're bad at. You have to identify them, and then you need to try to do them well without doing them worse. It's why, and we've used this metaphor before, I think, it's why the golf club, the golf resort has a pro on the staff to teach you to golf, because he can look at your swing and say, no, stop that. Drop your shoulder. Stop practicing it that way. You're just learning to do the wrong thing over and over again. I do not know who you would go to in order to practice this, but the secret lies in finding the things you're bad at and doing them differently until you're doing them well.
Yeah, I mean, practicing well is a practice. I think that's exactly... yeah, I mean, Kara in the chat saying perhaps practice in the sense one practices yoga. And I think that's true. Like a practice in terms of a thing that you make part of your life that you do on a regular basis. But practicing as the actual task that you're doing is its own challenge. Sort of on the lines of what you were saying, Howard, I think one of the big challenges around practicing a new skill is you fall into what I think of as the gap. Ira Glass has a clip about this that has gone around the internet many, many, many times. If you just Google Ira Glass and gap, you'll probably find it. It is basically the idea that when you start a creative practice, once you start a creative activity, your taste exceeds your skill. So your ability to read and appreciate things is far outmatched your ability to create the things that you want to create. And so the gap between those two things feels insurmountable and vast. And the only way to close that gap is to continue leaning into that feeling and to continue to create until you get to a place where you are more comfortably approaching, even though you probably will never actually attain the difference between your taste and your goals and what you're actually producing, right? That sense of that distance between them is one of the things that will continue to drive you. And my personal theory is if you ever feel like you caught that rabbit, then you need to take a step back and reflect on what work you still have to do, because there's always more to grow. There's always more to do. There was a quote, I think it was Scorsese a few months ago, was talking about how he feels like there is so little he understands about filmmaking now that he's in his 80s, and that there's so much he has to learn. And I saw this quote circling the internet as if it was a very sad thing, whereas I saw it as a very beautiful thing, because it's like, here's a man who has worked his whole life at the top of his field, who has achieved more than most people could ever dream of, and he still feels like there's more to learn, there's more to do, that there's space for him to keep pursuing his goals. And I thought that was wonderful to see, that he is still so energized and so curious about the world in front of him. So that was my thought about practice. That was me more answering Howard. I have a different answer to the original question, actually. So I'm going to keep talking for a second. But there's one thing I'm noticing in your questions, question asker, about how you're thinking about writing these spaces and executing on this particular skill. And that is, it feels like you are looking for the right way to do this. And I completely understand why you're looking for that. The thing I want to remind you of, though, is these artists that you're talking about, the Impressionists, choosing a sunset, choosing how to portray a haystack, choosing how to portray individual water lily, the way Turner paints light, all of these things, they were choices that they were making deliberately. They didn't pick the right thing. What they did was they picked what they wanted to do. And then they forced you, the audience, to go along with that. They grab you by the collar and say, hey, asshole, look at this haystack now. You've never looked at a haystack in your life. I'm going to make you look at 20 paintings of a haystack in a row, and you're going to admire it in a way that you never have before, right? Art isn't about communicating the right thing to open up a space. Art is about grabbing your audience and dragging them forcibly in front of the thing you want them to pay attention to and say, look at this cool thing that I made, right? And so I would encourage you, I do think practicing all the stuff we said is important. I do think thinking about what people's experience are in those spaces is important. But at the end of the day, what you are doing, and I want to empower you to do, is to make a choice. You pick what sound, you pick what smell, you pick what touch. And those things are communicating things about the space and the tone and the energy and the plot even, if you're in a cathedral, the smell of incense is going to communicate a variety of things versus the smell of smoke, versus the smell of somebody's BO, versus the smell of blood, right? Each of those are different stories, right? Each of those are different, maybe even time periods. So what I would encourage you to do is don't think about what the right choice is, and instead think about the story and what's going to drive your story forward and what's going to serve your goals in arresting the reader in this moment and making them pay attention to what you want them to pay attention to. So I just kind of want to flip it on its head for you a little bit and say, you're in control, you're in the driver's seat. You need to have authority over your reader, and this is authorial authority. We're only repeating words tonight, apparently, but authorial authority is really important. I mean, it's right there in the word, right? And one of the ways you exercise that is by making these choices over and over again until at the end of it you have a whole book. So that's my little rant on that.
It was a good rant.
Thank you. Okay, shall we continue to blaze through these questions?
I love this question. This next one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to read it and you can answer?
Yeah, you go for it.
All right, here we go. How do bad books get published? I'm not talking about the ones that were clearly intended for a different audience that valued different things, but the ones where I was clearly their target audience and wanted to love it, but the craft was so bad that I literally could not tell what was happening at any given moment. And when I read online reviews, its rating was terrible, and 40% of people have my exact same complaint. How do you make sure this doesn't happen to you? I'm now terrified I'm somehow going to Florence Foster Jenkins my way into print.
Great question.
Tell me, DongWon, how do bad books, why do bad books happen to good people?
I'm going to say, if you've been listening to me talk about publishing for a second, you know that one important thing for me is the ability to hold two opposite ideas in your head at the same time, to hold a contradictory thought and realize that both are true at the same time and in different ways. So I'm going to say two things right now that are both going to be controversial. First, controversial thought. There is no such thing as a bad book. Any book that was written and published and sold had people who loved it, people who believed in it, and people who swore up and down that it was great. Nobody publishes a bad book because they thought it was bad. Everyone believed in it at some point. Maybe not every single person on the team. Sometimes you get stuck with a project you don't necessarily believe in as a publishing professional. And sometimes as an author, you're not as confident about one book or another, but ultimately people believed in that book. And to them, it was a good book, is a good book. And there are people out there for every book that bombs, every book that tanks, every book that gets bad reviews, every book that gets criticized. There are people who love that book. There are people for whom that book spoke to them, meant something to them, moved them, touched them in some way. It may be one person. It may be 100 people. Doesn't matter. In someone's eyes, it's not a bad book. Second half of this, second controversial thought, and this is the one that y'all are really going to hate. Most books are bad. Most books don't work because bad is a relative term, right? So for me, 98% of movies, television, music, books, any art of any type that I encounter, I don't like, right? Because it's not for me. I'm the wrong audience for it, right? I think it's badly written. I think it's badly acted. I think it's badly produced. I think the set design is corny. I think whatever it is, right? Most things I encounter are not good. That is true for every single one of you. You have all walked into a bookstore and feel that most of the books in there aren't good or aren't for you. Some combination of those two things, right? Now, where this gets really messy is when we start using good and bad. They have very objective valences and moral valences. So as much as possible, kick those out of the room. They're not useful for us right now, right? But when we're talking about these things, most books aren't going to work. Most books aren't going to find a huge audience. Most books aren't going to connect with the majority of people, and that's okay, right? Every book is a swing. Some of them are going to hit, some of them aren't. And that is just the reality of the world that we live in. And it's okay if your book doesn't hit on the first swing. You keep writing books, and then one of your books won't be quote unquote bad to enough people that you will be a successful author, right? That's how you build a career, is not just one swing, but repeated swings over and over and over again. And hopefully over time, more of them are hits than aren't. But remember, every book that got published, no matter what you think of the craft, there are people who believe in that book, and there are people who that book means something to. So even though I say most books are bad, I also recognize that's a very relative opinion. That's my view. Now, my view is positioned at a place that I have more impact than your average person does over what does and doesn't get out there. But also there are thousands of literary agents. There are, hundreds of thousands of books published every year that I have nothing to do with, that I had no say over. Books are published every day by dear friends of mine that I don't like. Hugely successful books I think are absolute trash, right? And then there are books that have 5 readers that I adore, whether or not I was involved with them. There's so many tiny ass books out there that I would go to bat for over and over again and have ranted to people about, and nobody gets why I like this thing. So bad books get published because books get published. That's the real answer. And somebody believed in them, and that's okay. And how do you avoid doing it? You don't. You write the best book that you can, and some people will think it's bad, and you really hope that more of them think it's good than think it's bad. And if that's not the case, then write another book.
It just occurred to me, and I'm gonna posit this as a hypothesis. Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything is crap. Rephrasing Sturgeon's Law, 90% of everything that you encounter will not meet your standards, and the remaining 10% will. On the average, if 50% of what you encounter is awesome, then maybe your standards aren't as high as Sturgeon's, and you're winning because that means you get to enjoy more things. And I come back to that a lot. We've been watching Grimm on Prime, and we're halfway through the first season, and I love me some just monster of the week, minimal drama, just expand the universe a little bit with each episode, kind of, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know, but I'm loving it for what it is. And there are people who will say, oh gosh, it's just monster of the week. How boring. There is no good or bad indicator in there. There's just whether or not the thing falls above or below the 90% line in your personal Sturgeon scale.
Exactly. Howard, what's a thing that is bad that you adore?
Okay, this is, I'm sure, going to get me canceled. The Hobbit movies.
Yeah, those are bad.
I unequivocally love them.
I am so happy for you.
And one of the things that I recognize is that Tolkien, later in life, expressed, and I haven't looked at the letters or whatever in a long time, was trying to reconcile the Arkenstone with the Silmarils, and looking for a way to retcon the Hobbit. He didn't use the word retcon, and I look at that and I think, you know what? I think that's what Peter Jackson and team did, and I'm on board for it. Because if we'd treated the dwarves the way Tolkien treated the dwarves, it would have been a waste of actors. You put them on screen and they never get a line. So yeah, it's a thing that I've watched those movies 3 or 4 times all the way through, and I continue to enjoy them. There are parts that are just goofy, but
I love that. I do not like those movies, but I'm very happy that you do.
Yep. And see, that's a case where I get to win. I get to have a thing that I love, and DongWon can't have it.
Exactly. No, genuinely, I miss out on something because I wish I like liking things. I don't like not liking things.
Yes.
I have been in a hater mode recently where I keep not liking things that are very popular. And that's a bummer. I don't enjoy that. I don't like being the one person who's like, yeah, but it was blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? There's no joy in that for me. Yeah. I think I have 2 ways of answering that question. One is a thing that is popular, but critically panned that I really enjoy. And that would be Cyberpunk 2077, even before the recent updates. Everybody hated that game. Everyone's like, it's badly written. And I was the one person over there who spent 1 million hours in that game, completed the campaign twice, just totally loved being in that world, as nonsense as it was, as edgelordy as it was.
$75 worth, my friend.
I got my money's worth out of that. I am back in that world with the new expansion. I'm having a blast. And I can't defend it. I'm like, it's not good craft wise, technically wise. There were all these things wrong with it, but I had a good time. And then in the other direction, which is thing that I wish was loved more and that a lot of people don't like, is the Netflix show The OA, which is a deeply weird, deeply strange, incredibly pretentious object that I nonetheless think is one of the most brilliant pieces of television made in the last 10 years. It's absolutely bonkers. Old Night is one of my favorite things I've ever seen in a television show. And yeah, and that's that. I wish more people knew it and liked it. So we all get to like, you get to like whatever you want to like. And there's a joy in liking things and let other people like the things that they want. And that doesn't mean that you don't get to be critical or have thoughts or write good criticism about it. But the world's complex and people's taste is vast and unexpected. So, shall we move on to the next question?
Let's go to the next question. Excuse me.
Okay. In the past few years, I've read quite a few endings of books and series where even though the action is great, it doesn't solve the issues brought up in the first 3/4 of the story. How do we avoid this from happening in our own stories? And that is from Aisha. What are your thoughts? Having just completed the biggest story in the world.
Yeah, I have a simple answer. Keep track of those issues somewhere other than the manuscript. If you're if it's in the manuscript, then every time you read it, you're reading in editor mode. You're reading in a different mode. You're not reading like a reader because this is your work. And so you keep track of those issues in a spreadsheet. Give yourself a to-do list. This romantic subplot needs to be resolved. They get together, they don't get together, but there has to be some sort of closure. Or you have to edit out the knowing glances, the longing looks in Act 1, because those made a promise, and if you didn't fulfill that promise later, you've failed the reader on that count. So keep track, treat each one as a to-do item, and then invite, and of course this is the lap of absolute luxury, invite your critique group to help you build that list. If your critique group goes through, the first 2/3 of your book and has a list of things that they would like to see resolved in the ending, and that doesn't match your list, you have new and exciting information to work with as you are writing your ending. And I am envious of the jolly fun that you will get to have.
I have a vague memory that Mary Robinette, as always, has a great tool for this. I know she went over it in a recent episode. I'm not sure. Oh,
it probably rhymes with mice.
It probably rhymes with mice. She did have an answer for this. It is coming up in one of our November episodes for NaNoWriMo. So that's because we do talk about endings in that. So I don't remember what her tool is. I remember it was good and that she's very smart at talking about this. So I would circle back in a month, check in with our NaNoWriMo episodes, and there is going to be one on endings that hopefully will answer this.
Yeah, there's a whole structural question. It's an entire discipline unto itself for placing those issues within the book, so that the asking of the questions, the raising of the issue, the creation of the tension or the raising of the stakes, so that those things are working together as part of a unified push to turn pages and move to the end, as opposed to walking through your house and accumulating to-do lists, because of all the messes in every corner. Unless you want to write absolute verisimilitude and, forget narrative, I'm just gonna have stuff happen until it stops.
Which is sometimes a good way to approach things. And, I believe there are many successful authors who have approached their endings that way. And, I understand the frustration of feeling like some issues that were brought up in the beginning aren't addressed at the end. sometimes that's okay, right? I do think in general you want to close these things out. But also I think a little bit of messiness, a little bit of open doors, a little bit of dropped threads with some verisimilitude is okay. You don't want to do it so much that people feel really disappointed. But again, some of the most successful authors in the world are notorious for just abandoning entire plots, right? I think Stephen King is very famous for this, of just wandering off in a different direction and finding an answer somewhere else. And yet, I would argue his books are satisfying reads. Are his endings the most compelling, satisfying part of what he's doing? No, not at all. But it hasn't hurt his career, and I don't think it necessarily means he's a bad writer, right? Neil Stephenson, another one who just seems to stop a book when he has run out of things to say, rather than necessarily going back and addressing everything that was brought up in the beginning. He's gotten better at this over the years, I would think, but especially what is that book called? Snow Crash is a book that I truly adore that just stops at some point. They run out of people to kill is basically the answer, and therefore the plot ends. So, but I have no complaint about that, really. It is an incredible read. It's so much fun. It is very smart in all these different ways. So the answer is yes, make a list, keep track of it. Also, don't freak out about it too much, right? But I think Howard had some great tools. Again, Mary Robinette's going to talk about some great tools coming up, and there's lots of ways to approach it.
I'm going to bet that Mary Robinette's structural tools have more structure to them.
This is the great joy of doing this podcast, is all five of us have such different ways of thinking about craft and such different approaches to how we do the various creative things that we do. Mary Robin and I, in some ways, are very distant from each other in how we approach. I'm very philosophical and kind of woolly and, talk about high level stuff. And she's has this infinite toolkit and has a rubric and a chart and all these things for almost any problem that you have. And it is so fascinating and delightful to me to watch her pull those out and present them. And I'm always like, wow, I guess I really have never thought about this that carefully, huh? Okay.
Do I get to read the next one?
Yeah, go for it.
This sounds very much to me like a aimed directly at DongWon question. Query protocol. I submitted a query over 4 months ago to an agent. I am assuming it's a no response rejection. The agent has less than a 50% response rate on Query Tracker. It's at an agency focused on my genre, so I'd like to query other agents and projects, but neither the agent's bio nor the agency submission guideline lists an automatic rejection period. Is it safe to consider my query a rejection?
Yes, it is probably safe. I mean, 4 months is a little short, especially if they're known to be a little slow. Agents, I feel like, have gotten slower recently. I think 6 months is a more safe window. That said, and this question is from Kara, I think the best thing to do in these scenarios is just ask, right? I think you can reach out to the agent in question and just say, hey, I would like to, I sent this to you 4 months ago. I'm wondering if you're still considering it. And would you be okay with me submitting this to other agents at the agency? That they may say no to that. They may say, no, we consider a submission to any one of us a rejection from the agency. And they may say, I'm still considering, or they may say, yeah, I don't have time to look at this, and it's probably a pass for me, right? I think if you can approach it with an understanding that they probably haven't replied because they're very busy, and make some space for that, keep your question very brief and make it easy for them to respond quickly, and that'll more likely get you a response. But in general, I think best practice is just to ask and follow up. Unless I specifically say not to follow up with me for some reason, which I don't think I've ever done, I have never been offended by a check-in or offended by somebody following up when it's a reasonable amount of time, right? Like if you sent the query and then next week you're like, hey, where's my answer? Then I'm gonna be like, all right, you need to calm down. But if it's 4 months is a reasonable amount of time. So I feel like, yeah, my advice is to reach out. It's probably a rejection at this point. But also, in addition to that 50% response rate, take a look at how long it takes them to send rejections on Query Tracker. If their average response time is 6 months, then you might need to give it more time. If their average response time is 3 weeks, then you're probably good, right? So the unfortunate reality is it's probably all over the place. This is a very busy season for literary agents. We're in the fall. Everything's popping right now. So you might see a slower response time in general at this moment. Summer is slow for the opposite reason of no one's paying attention, so sometimes, I don't know, there might be a lot of other factors going on. So my advice is take the safe route and just check in and sort of see what's going on. So yeah,
one of the things that I had someone present a similar conundrum to me several years ago. They said, I've got a manuscript out and I'm just frozen waiting for a response. And I said, well, if they respond and say, we don't like it, sorry, is that going to make you stop writing? And the woman I was talking to said, no, I'll keep writing. Good. If their response is, we love it, is that going to make you stop writing? No. Okay, cool. So right now, are you writing? And she said, no. Why not? Because currently things are out of your hands. You are waiting on a response from someone else, but what is that waiting period really for? If you still have time to write, keep writing, because it may very well be that, 2 months from now, the agent or the publisher or whoever gets back to you and says, we really like your style, but this isn't a thing that fits. Do you have anything else? And you can say, oh, I do. I'm 2 months into this other thing.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of the submitted questions. We still have a few minutes here, so Howard, if you're okay with that, I'm open to opening it up to questions from the audience if you guys have some stuff.
Throw it open.
Yeah. Or we could end the stream a little bit early if you guys don't have anything. But if somebody's got a question for us, hit us up.
I got plenty of time. I'm still hatching Pokemon eggs. So
you're just shaking over there.
Yep, that's just.
How's the Kickstarter going?
We are in our last 3 days, and Incredible. We are about $5,500 from getting to make pins, and I'm excited.
Hell yeah!
The Kickstarter has done what it needed to do, which is it's going to pay for the book and it's going to pay our bills until we can launch the next Kickstarter. And it's a little bit like what's the the old farm living thing, the work you do in October and November is what needs to feed you until next October and November. And this harvest looks like it'll do that.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. I'm really excited for that. If people on stream have not yet backed it, where can they go do that?
I can post that into the comments. Is that the best place to do that?
Probably, yes.
Because it's certainly the easiest thing for me. Here comes a link.
Excellent.
This comment has failed to post to writing excuses, probably because it had a URL in it.
Send me the link in the private chat and I will post it as a banner. In the meantime, we have a question from Dr. Wordperson.
Yes, I was looking at that question. That's a
good question. Wrote a scene and people reacted completely differently. One person was super traumatized, just horrified, and another person thought it was the most hilarious thing. And then the second half is what happened. Is this a win because people reacted? What are your thoughts, Howard?
On the one hand, yes, it's a win. You wrote it well enough that people reacted. That the response was not flat. If you didn't want people laughing, if what comes later in the story isn't going to be supported by people laughing at this moment, then you have a problem. Similarly, if people are triggered or horrified or whatever and throw the book across the room and never finish it, you also have a problem. The solution lies in some really tricky social engineering. I say social engineering as a dumb way to say effectively communicating with your friends, the readers, and helping them unpack the experience they had, especially the person who's traumatized. Because if their response, if they're actually, horrified and traumatized, getting them to talk about why might be tricky. I don't know.
Follow-up question for you, Dr. Wordperson, that might help us here. What was your intent with the scene? Did you want them to be traumatized, or were you trying to be funny? Or neither? Because I think that will really affect sort of the solution here, right? Because the reality is, if you're writing a horror story, there is a section of the audience that their tolerance for trauma or their response to traumatic things is just always going to be defined as funny. And that's okay, right? I think humor and scares are a hair's breadth apart from each other, right? It's why Jordan Peele is one of our greatest horror auteurs, because it's the same skill set that sets up a joke as sets up a scare. And Howard, I believe it's what you call the comedic drop. The comedic drop can also be deployed to horrify, right? And so that those being the two reactions make sense to me because they are very close to being the same reaction. Okay, so the further detail about it is that it was seen where someone behaves immaturely around some of their childhood bullies, and wanted the person to feel like this guy's behavior was pathetic and sad. That genuinely is a thing where I can see that going either way. Yep. I mean, pathetic and sad is a thing that some people find to be horrifying and upsetting, and that some people will find to be very, very funny. Okay, this is the further detail.
Your reading group. You may have a completely different set of problems.
Yeah. Okay. You know what, Dr. Wordperson? I think you're fine. I think it's fine that these two people respond differently. And this is more of a lesson, I think, for everyone than anything else, because you have no control over your readers, right? You don't know who your readers are. You don't know what their ethics are going to be, what their attitude towards other people are going to be. And some people are just going to respond differently, right? So, I think it's not particularly surprising that these two people responded very differently based on your description of them. And I think that it's basically fine that they did. And just remember that once you've written the thing, once you've handed it off to your reader, you have no control at that point over how they're going to respond. And that's okay. Some people will love it. Some people will hate it. See my earlier comments about what makes a quote unquote bad book, right? Both of those people may think the book is bad or may think it's good for different reasons, and that's okay. The jerk may love your book because of this guy being so pathetic, and he likes to be in the position of the bully and go, ha ha, what a nerd. And the person who's traumatized may love this book because she may empathize so deeply with this character and feel his pain. Those aren't necessarily bad things, right? So again, you are grabbing your audience by the collar and saying what to pay attention to, but their reaction to what you want them to pay attention to, you can't control. You can control their attention, their view. You can control what's presented to them. You cannot dictate how they will feel. You can direct, you can influence, you can arrange it so that most people will feel a certain set of things, but you never know what your reader's going to do.
Now, one trick that is, sorry, I made that sound like one weird trick, which it's not. If you have a character who is likable, and we've opened the book, liking and trusting this character, you can use that character's reactions as a signaling device to the reader. If that character thinks this is pathetic and sad and miserable, then the reader may adjust themselves to that point of view. It's tricky to do, but I see it more and more in media now that I know to look for it. Is there a character who is serving as my emotional barometer, and their reaction to a thing is in most cases the reaction that the author or the director or whoever kind of wants me to have. You can't use it for everything, because then you're just telling me what to feel. But it's a useful trick.
Nice. Okay. Question from Genius Dragon. Very into that handle. I'm looking at writing a TTRPG. Howard has done that before. What would you do different / avoid / etc.? What advice in general do you have?
I'm going to introduce you to the concept of the $10,000 conversation. I was at what's Confusion? Is that the one in Michigan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was at Confusion, and Monty Cook and Shauna Germain were there, and I had the opportunity on opening night. I just got seated at their table for the the informal dinner, and I told them, "Hey, I'm writing a schlock mercenary RPG. What are the pitfalls that you guys had with Numenera?" I'm sorry to pick your brains. I realized that this is a casual dinner, not a Howard tutorial. And both of them were like, let us eat faster so we can give Howard a tutorial. And this was one of those things that I call a $10,000 conversation, which is, if I had known in advance that I would be able to have this, I would have paid $10,000 in order to get that 2-hour lecture from those two about what to do and what not to do.
So what's the 10-cent version of the 10,000?
I'm leading with that because I don't have time to give you the $10,000 conversation that you want. The pitfalls, there are so many ways to get bogged down in TTRPG stuff. Do you already have a game engine? Do you already have the flow of play from character creation to party creation to adventuring? Do you already have those things nailed down, or are you reinventing them? Do you have to write the entire world book, or are you just repackaging world book notes that you have for other things? And then how do you sell it? Well, that's its own special hell, because tabletop RPGs, a whole lot more effort goes into tabletop RPG creation than the money that comes out of them will justify. The market is not as big as it should be for the amount of work that goes into these amazing worlds that get created. So, kind of a non-answer, I know. It's such a big question.
It sounds like we should get you to teach a masterclass on this at some point, so we can get, if not the $10,000 version.
Well, the big thing that slowed us down, and we lost, it's unbelievable to me looking back at it, but we lost a year because I was asking Sandra for a thing, and Sandra didn't understand what I was asking for, couldn't understand why I even needed it, and kept not giving it to me. What I wanted was sample page layouts using existing text and placeholder images so I could see how many words went to a page, went to a picture, went to a call out, went to whatever else, because I needed to build a spreadsheet for myself for the kind of work that I was doing. And it just did not make sense to Sandra that she should be laying out pages with lorem ipsum and placeholder blocks. Why would you even need that? Because we need to close the communication gap, and we need to accept that I need it in order to get the work done. Once we closed that loop, things went very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. The only counsel I have here is don't let a communication block prevent work from happening on any project. Everybody should be talking to everybody else as much as is reasonable and communicating clearly so that crap that happened to me doesn't happen to you.
That makes a lot of sense. Genius, I have not written a TTRPG. I am tooling around with some new rule systems right now, but the thing that I would recommend to you is a thing that kind of applies to a lot of writing very broadly, which is make sure you're reading broadly in the category. There are so many approaches right now to how to write a TTRPG source book, depending on what system you're using, depending on what setting you're using. Is it a 5e thing? Is it an indie thing? Is it Forge of the Dark? Each of those things will have a completely different set of requirements that go from needing a big hardcover, massive tome to having basically something that's the length of a zine. So I think understanding who your target audience is, what your production costs are going to be, what kind of object you're trying to have at the end of this. Is this a fun one-pager, or is this, again, a beautifully illustrated, designed slipcase, premium thing? How are you going to get that to people? Who's the audience? What's the game? All of those things, right? And then, there's so many different approaches to how to communicate rules to audience, how to communicate safety tools, world building, all these things. So what I would say is to really look around very broadly, read a bunch of things, read games that you have no interest in playing, whether that's, you're an indie RPG person, go read a D&D source book then, right? If you're a D&D player, I'm begging you, go look at some of what's on itch, what's on Kickstarter. There's so many exciting games coming out every day. I just backed 2 projects literally today. I think the TTRPG space is a really exciting space right now in terms of independent creators, in terms of the amount of just raw creative energy I'm seeing over there. So I say good luck and go have fun with it. And with that, I think we are coming up to the hour here. So I'm going to wind down the stream. Thank you to all of you for coming. I hope you found this conversation to be useful. This should be archived on YouTube going forward if you want to go back and refer to stuff, and feel free to share it with your friends. And again, if you want to ask questions ahead of time so we have a little bit more thorough answers, please subscribe to the Patreon. Again, that's writingexcuses.com. patreon.com/writingexcuses. There you go. And become a backer there, and then you can submit your questions ahead of time. So thanks again. I love doing these streams. These are always so much fun.
So much fun.
Thanks for coming, Howard.
Always good to see everybody.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody.